Most people like to believe that bad decisions come from a lack of intelligence. They think, if I were smarter, I wouldn't have made that mistake. Or, if those people were more educated, this wouldn't have happened. Charlie Munger didn't buy that idea at all. In his view, stupidity is rarely about IQ. It's about how people think, not how much they know. Some of the most disastrous decisions in history were made by people who were clearly intelligent. Engineers with decades of experience, doctors at the top of their field, executives with impressive resumes. They weren't dumb, they were trapped by a single way of thinking. Munger liked to quote an old saying, "To a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail." It sounds almost silly at first, but once you really sit with it, it becomes uncomfortable. Because most of us are walking around with one hammer, and we keep swinging it at every problem we see. If you're trained as an engineer, you start seeing the world as a set of technical problems. If you studied economics, everything becomes incentives and trade-offs. If you work in finance, you reduce life to numbers, charts, and projections. None of these perspectives are wrong. The problem starts when one perspective becomes the only lens you use. When that happens, reality doesn't get simpler, it gets distorted. Munger noticed something interesting about experts. The deeper they go into a single field, the more confident they become and the more dangerous their blind spots grow. A specialist often knows more and more about less and less. Eventually, they're absolute masters of a tiny slice of reality. And then they start applying that slice to everything. Doctors overprescribe, lawyers overcomplicate, engineers over-optimize, investors see patterns where none exist. Not because they're careless, but because their mental toolkit is too narrow. Munger saw this again and again, especially in business and investing. Companies didn't fail because they couldn't do math. They failed because they misunderstood human behavior, or ignored incentives, or underestimated second-order effects. They used the right tool for the wrong job. One of Munger's core beliefs was simple. If you rely on just one model of the world, you are almost guaranteed to misjudge reality. And the scary part is, it doesn't feel like misjudgment when it's happening. It feels like confidence. When you only have one way of thinking, every problem starts to look familiar. You feel experienced, you feel decisive. But that comfort is exactly what makes single model thinking so dangerous. Because the real world isn't organized by academic departments. Problems don't announce which discipline they belong to. A business failure is rarely just a business problem. A personal collapse is rarely just a motivation issue. A bad investment is rarely just about numbers. They're messy, they overlap. They involve psychology, incentives, randomness, and timing, all at once. Munger used to say that people who don't understand this end up committing what he called elementary, obvious mistakes. Not subtle errors, big, embarrassing ones. And what frustrated him most was that these mistakes were avoidable. Not by becoming a genius, but by refusing to think in only one dimension. Think about how often people argue past each other. One person talks only about efficiency, another talks only about fairness, a third talks only about tradition. Everyone is partially right and completely wrong at the same time, because each person is looking at the situation through a single lens and mistaking it for the whole picture. Munger believed that wisdom starts when you become suspicious of your own favorite ideas. When you catch yourself saying, "This explains everything," that's a warning sign. Reality is rarely that generous. In investing, single model thinking shows up as obsession. People fall in love with one metric, one strategy, one story. They ignore anything that doesn't fit. And when reality finally breaks through, the damage is already done. But Munger wasn't just talking about money. He believed this was a general human flaw. We like clean explanations. We like simple causes. We like feeling certain. The world doesn't cooperate. Instead, it rewards people who can hold multiple ideas in their head at the same time. People who can say, "This might be true, but what else could be going on?" That ability doesn't come from intelligence alone. It comes from having more than one way to think. Munger once pointed out that if you want to understand why something happened, you usually need several explanations working together, not one. And if you insist on forcing a single explanation onto complex reality, you don't just misunderstand the world, you make bad decisions in it. That's why he was so focused on avoiding stupidity rather than chasing brilliance. Brilliance without balance is fragile. It collapses under pressure. A narrow mind breaks easily. A broader one bends. The irony is that single model thinking often looks impressive from the outside. People who speak with certainty, who always have an answer, who reduce complex issues to one neat idea. They sound smart. Munger didn't trust that sound. He trusted results. And over time, he saw that the people who lasted, the ones who survived long careers without blowing themselves up, were rarely the most confident speakers in the room. They were the ones who hesitated, who checked themselves, who asked, "What am I missing?" That question alone implies more than one mental model. And that's the real shift Munger is pushing for. Not more information, not faster thinking, but wider thinking. Once you see the danger of relying on a single way of understanding the world, you can't unsee it. You start noticing it everywhere, in politics, in business, in everyday life. People don't fail because they're lazy or stupid. They fail because they're using the wrong lens, and they don't even realize it. For Munger, that realization was the starting point. Before learning new ideas, you first have to accept that one idea will never be enough. That's where multi-model thinking begins.
When people first hear the phrase mental models, they often imagine something complicated. It sounds technical, almost academic, like something you'd need a whiteboard and a textbook to understand. Charlie Munger hated that reaction because in his mind, mental models were not about being fancy. They were about being practical. At the simplest level, a mental model is just a way of understanding how something works. It's a shortcut your brain uses to make sense of reality. Everyone already uses mental models, whether they realize it or not. When you touch a hot stove once and never do it again, that's a model. When you notice that incentives change behavior, that's a model. When you learn that some actions have delayed consequences, that's a model too. The problem isn't that people don't have mental models. The problem is that most people have too few, and they don't know which ones they're using. Munger didn't see mental models as theories. He saw them as tools, and tools only matter if you use the right one for the job. Imagine trying to fix everything in your house with just a hammer. You could hit nails just fine, but the moment you run into a screw, a pipe, or a wire, you're stuck. You might even cause damage without realizing it. That's how people approach thinking. They learned one framework that works well early in life, maybe from school, work, or a past success, and then they apply it everywhere. Over time, that framework becomes invisible. It stops feeling like a tool and starts feeling like reality itself. That's when mistakes get expensive. Munger was very clear about what mental models are not. They are not motivational slogans. They are not productivity hacks. They are not clever tricks to sound smart in conversations. And they are definitely not a checklist you memorize and forget. A real mental model changes how you see situations before you act. It alters your instincts. That's why Munger emphasized understanding over memorization. Knowing the name of a model doesn't help. Being able to recognize when it applies does. Most people collect ideas the way they collect quotes. They sound nice, they feel insightful, but they don't change behavior. Munger had no patience for that. He believed that if an idea didn't improve your judgment, it was basically useless. That's why he often compared thinking to building a lattice work. Not a straight line, not a single theory, a structure made from many beams supporting each other. Each model adds strength in a different direction. One model explains incentives, another explains human bias, another explains how systems fail, another explains how randomness plays tricks on our intuition. No single one is enough, but together they reduce blind spots. That was Munger's real goal: fewer blind spots. He knew you could never eliminate mistakes completely, but you could avoid the big, obvious ones that wipe people out. And that starts by understanding what a model actually does. A good mental model simplifies reality without lying about it. That's an important balance. Oversimplification feels good, but it breaks easily. Overcomplication feels intelligent, but it paralyzes action. A useful model sits in the middle. It strips away noise while keeping what matters. For example, consider incentives. That single idea explains an enormous amount of human behavior. People respond to rewards and punishments, often in predictable ways, not always rationally, but consistently. Once you truly understand that, you stop being surprised by things that used to confuse you. Why a company behaves strangely, why an organization rewards the wrong outcomes, why smart people do dumb things under pressure. The model doesn't give you answers, it gives you a lens. And that's what all good models do. They don't tell you what to think, they help you see what's already there. Munger warned against falling in love with any single model, no matter how powerful it seems, because every model has limits. Incentives explain a lot, but not everything. Psychology explains a lot, but not everything. Statistics explain patterns, but not meaning. The danger comes when you forget those limits. That's why Munger insisted on having multiple models ready at all times, not to show off, but to cross-check reality. If several models point in the same direction, you're probably on solid ground. If they conflict, that's a signal to slow down. Most bad decisions happen when people rush forward with one explanation and ignore everything else. Munger preferred friction. He liked ideas rubbing against each other because friction generates insight. Another misunderstanding about mental models is that people think they're only useful for big decisions, investments, careers, life-altering choices. Munger didn't see it that way. He believed mental models shape everyday judgment: how you interpret feedback, how you react to failure, how you decide who to trust. Small errors repeated daily quietly compound. Mental models help prevent that kind of slow damage. They don't make life easier, they make it clearer, and clarity beats comfort in the long run. One reason people resist this way of thinking is that it requires humility. You have to accept that your favorite explanation might be incomplete, that your past success might have been luck mixed with skill, that you don't see the whole picture. That's uncomfortable, but Munger believed that discomfort was the price of better judgment. If thinking feels effortless all the time, you're probably missing something. Mental models are meant to challenge your first reaction, not reinforce it. They create a pause, a moment where you ask, what else could be going on here? That pause alone can change outcomes. Munger wasn't interested in fast thinkers. He was interested in careful ones. People who could resist the urge to simplify too quickly. People who understood that reality doesn't owe us easy explanations. Once you start seeing mental models this way, as tools, not theories, the idea becomes much less intimidating. You don't need dozens. You don't need perfect understanding. You just need enough models to avoid being trapped by one. That shift from collecting ideas to building a usable framework is what Munger cared about. And once you make that shift, thinking itself starts to feel different, less reactive, less emotional, more grounded. Not because you know more, but because you're finally seeing the world through more than one window.
One of Charlie Munger's most uncomfortable ideas was also one of his simplest. The world does not operate in separate categories. Reality doesn't care what you studied. It doesn't care what job title you have. It doesn't care how deep your expertise goes in one narrow area. It just does what it does. Problems don't arrive labeled. They don't announce whether they're economic, psychological, technical, or moral. They arrive as messy situations.
And when you approach a messy situation with a single academic lens, you're already at a disadvantage. Munger saw this as a basic mismatch between how humans are trained and how the world actually works. Education teaches us to specialize early, to go deep, to become very good at one thing. That's useful, but it also quietly trains us to ignore everything else. Over time, that habit becomes automatic. You stop asking what else might matter here. You start asking, how does this fit into what I already know? That's not curiosity, that's self-protection. Munger believed most big failures come from this exact pattern. People don't fail because they lack intelligence. They fail because they mistake a partial explanation for a complete one. Take a company that collapses despite strong financials. On paper, everything looked fine. The numbers made sense. The strategy was logical. What was missed? Usually something human: ego, culture, incentives, fear. None of those show up cleanly in spreadsheets. Or think about a technology that works perfectly in a lab but fails in the real world. The engineering is solid, the design is elegant. What went wrong? Human behavior, adoption friction, unintended consequences. The system worked, the environment didn't. Munger learned early on that if you want to understand outcomes, you have to understand systems, and systems don't respect boundaries. They blend forces together. Economic pressure changes behavior. Behavior creates feedback loops. Feedback loops amplify small errors. Time turns tiny issues into disasters. If you only understand one piece, you miss the pattern. That's why Munger pushed so hard against siloed thinking. He wasn't anti-expertise, he was anti-isolation. He wanted ideas that traveled well, ideas that showed up in many situations, not just one field. He believed the most useful models were the ones that kept reappearing no matter where you looked. Cause and effect, incentives, trade-offs, limits, adaptation. Once you notice that, something shifts. You stop asking, what field is this problem from? You start asking, what forces are interacting here? That question alone widens your thinking. Munger also noticed that cross-disciplinary thinking exposes contradictions, and contradictions are valuable. If two models give you different predictions about the same situation, something interesting is happening. Either one of the models doesn't apply, or you don't fully understand the situation yet. Most people avoid that tension. They pick the explanation they like and ignore the rest. Munger leaned into it. He believed confusion was often a sign that you were getting closer to the truth, because reality is complex. Clean explanations are usually incomplete. Another reason cross-disciplinary thinking matters is that it helps you spot fake certainty. In many fields, people sound confident because they're speaking within familiar rules, but when you move an idea into a different context, its weaknesses show up fast. A theory that only works in one environment is fragile. A principle that works across many is robust. Munger trusted robustness. He wanted ideas that survived contact with different situations. That's why he spent so much time reading outside his comfort zone, not to become an expert in everything, but to avoid being fooled by narrow thinking. He understood that ignorance compounds when it hides behind authority. Someone can sound incredibly convincing while being fundamentally wrong if you don't have another model to compare against. Cross-disciplinary models act like mental checks and balances. They don't guarantee correct answers, but they reduce the chance of catastrophic errors. And for Munger, avoiding catastrophe mattered more than chasing perfection. There's also a practical reason this approach works so well. Life rarely gives you time to fully analyze problems. You don't get perfect information, you don't get unlimited time, you don't get a second try. In those moments, you fall back on instinct. Mental models shape that instinct. If your instincts are built from only one discipline, they'll fail when conditions change. If they're built from multiple perspectives, they adapt. Munger wasn't trying to make people smarter in an academic sense. He was trying to make them harder to fool, especially themselves. He once pointed out that the biggest risk isn't ignorance, it's false confidence. Cross-disciplinary thinking weakens that confidence in a healthy way. It forces you to ask better questions. What am I overlooking? What assumptions am I carrying from another context? What would this look like from a completely different angle? Those questions slow you down, but they also save you. The world rewards speed in some areas, but in judgment, speed is often the enemy. Munger understood that lasting success comes from aligning your thinking with how reality actually behaves, and reality behaves like a network, not a straight line. Causes overlap, effects lag, feedback loops surprise you. You don't see that clearly if you're stuck inside one mental box. Once you accept that no single discipline owns the truth, your relationship with knowledge changes. You stop collecting answers, you start collecting perspectives. You become less certain and more accurate, less impressive in conversation, more reliable in decisions. That trade-off mattered to Munger. He didn't care about sounding smart, he cared about being less wrong over time. And that's the real reason cross-disciplinary thinking isn't optional. It's not an intellectual hobby, it's a survival skill. Because the world will never meet you where your comfort zone is. It will meet you where all forces collide at once, and only a broader way of thinking gives you a fighting chance to understand what's actually happening.
Charlie Munger never described himself as a genius. In fact, he spent a surprising amount of time doing the opposite. He talked about stupidity far more than intelligence. That wasn't an accident. Munger believed most people aim at the wrong target. They chase brilliance. They want clever insights. They want to feel smarter than others. He wanted something much simpler. He wanted to avoid doing obviously dumb things. That may sound unambitious, but it's one of the most powerful ideas in his entire worldview. Because most disasters don't come from subtle mistakes, they come from basic ones. Overconfidence, emotional decisions, ignoring obvious risks, believing your own story. Munger used to say that he wasn't trying to be smart, he was trying to avoid being stupid. And he meant it literally. If you look at how people actually fail, financially, professionally, personally, the pattern is remarkably consistent. They don't collapse because they lacked insight, they collapse because they violated simple rules. They took on too much leverage, they trusted the wrong incentives, they followed the crowd at exactly the wrong moment, they refused to admit they were wrong. None of that requires low intelligence. In fact, intelligence often makes it worse. Smart people are very good at explaining their mistakes, especially to themselves. They build elegant justifications. They rationalize warning signs. They confuse explanation with wisdom. Munger saw this as one of the great dangers of high intelligence without discipline. The smarter you are, the easier it is to talk yourself into trouble. That's why he focused so heavily on what he called standard causes of human misjudgment. Not rare psychological quirks, common ones, things that affect almost everyone. Greed doesn't announce itself as greed, it shows up as optimism. Fear doesn't feel like fear, it feels like urgency. Ego doesn't say, "I'm wrong," it says, "This time is different." Most bad decisions feel reasonable in the moment. That's what makes them dangerous. Munger believed the first job of thinking is not finding the smartest move, but removing the stupid ones from the table. If you eliminate actions that reliably lead to ruin, what's left doesn't need to be brilliant. It just needs to be decent. This is where his thinking becomes almost brutally practical. He didn't ask, "How do I win big?" He asked, "How do I avoid losing everything?" That shift changes how you evaluate choices. Instead of chasing upside, you start paying attention to fragility. What could break this? What assumptions have to hold for this to work?
What happens if I'm wrong? These questions aren't exciting, they don't make good headlines, but they keep you alive in the long run. Munger was deeply suspicious of stories that involved no downside. Whenever something looked too good, he assumed something important was being hidden, usually risk. He also understood that stupidity is often social. People do dumb things in groups far easily than alone. When everyone around you is confident, doubt feels foolish. When everyone is winning, caution feels unnecessary. Munger resisted that pressure by designing his life to make stupidity harder. He avoided environments that rewarded short-term wins at long-term cost. He stayed away from situations where incentives encouraged reckless behavior. He simplified his decisions to reduce emotional noise. This wasn't luck, it was structure. He believed discipline beats brilliance because discipline operates even when emotions are high. Brilliance disappears under pressure. That's why he relied so heavily on checklists, rules, and habits, not because he lacked creativity, but because he didn't trust his own judgment in moments of excitement. That level of self-distrust is rare. Most people trust their intuition the most when they should trust it the least. Munger flipped that instinct. He assumed his brain was vulnerable to bias, to ego, to self-deception. So he built systems to protect himself from himself. This idea runs directly against modern culture. We celebrate bold moves, we admire confidence, we reward risk-taking. Munger wasn't impressed. He knew that survival is underrated. If you survive long enough, small advantages compound. If you blow up once, none of your intelligence matters. That's why he valued consistency over brilliance. A series of non-stupid decisions beats a few brilliant ones followed by a catastrophe. He also believed that many people confuse activity with progress. They feel smart because they're doing something. Munger was comfortable doing nothing. If he didn't understand something well enough to avoid obvious mistakes, he simply waited. Patience was part of his anti-stupidity strategy. So was saying no. Most people say yes too often, to opportunities, to commitments, to explanations that flatter them. Each yes adds complexity. Each complexity adds risk. Munger kept his world small on purpose, not because he lacked ambition, but because he understood the cost of unnecessary exposure. This mindset applies far beyond investing. In careers, people take roles they don't understand for status. In relationships, they ignore red flags for comfort. In life, they trade long-term stability for short-term excitement. None of that requires a lack of intelligence. It requires a lack of restraint. Munger's approach was almost boring, and that's why it worked. He believed the biggest edge most people could gain wasn't learning something new, it was stopping themselves from doing things they already knew were a bad idea. That doesn't require genius, it requires honesty. Honesty about your weaknesses, honesty about your emotional triggers, honesty about how easily you can be fooled. Once you accept that, your thinking changes. You stop trying to outsmart the world. You start trying to stay out of its traps. And paradoxically, that makes you more effective. Because when you remove stupidity from your decision-making, what's left doesn't have to be extraordinary. It just has to be sensible. That was Munger's real insight. Wisdom isn't about having brilliant thoughts. It's about having fewer catastrophic ones.
One of the easiest traps smart people fall into is confusing explanation with usefulness. They learn an idea, they can explain it clearly, they can even impress others with it, and then they stop there. Charlie Munger had very little patience for that. He wasn't interested in ideas that sounded good after the fact. He cared about ideas that worked before the decision was made, because explanation without action is just decoration.
Mental models, in Munger's view, had one job: to improve judgment at the moment it actually matters. Not when you're telling the story later, not when you're defending a mistake, but right before you commit. That distinction is crucial. A model that only helps you explain why something happened is often useless. A model that helps you avoid doing something stupid in advance is priceless. Munger evaluated ideas by one standard: does this help me make a better decision? If the answer was no, he didn't care how elegant the theory was. This is where many people get mental models wrong. They treat them like lenses for storytelling, not tools for choice. They use them to feel smart after the outcome is known. But real decisions don't come with explanations attached. They come with uncertainty, incomplete information, emotional pressure, time constraints. That's when models matter. Munger understood that most decisions aren't about finding the perfect answer. They're about narrowing the range of terrible ones. Good judgment doesn't require certainty. It requires eliminating obvious failure modes. That's why he focused so heavily on things like margin of safety, not because it guaranteed success, but because it reduced the cost of being wrong. A mental model that increases your tolerance for error is more valuable than one that promises precision. Precision is fragile, robustness lasts. Munger also believed decisions should be evaluated in context, not isolation. A choice that looks smart on its own can be disastrous as part of a system. That's why he constantly asked second-order questions. What happens next? And then what? And after that? Most people stop at the first effect. They see a benefit and rush in. Munger trained himself to look for delayed consequences, the kind that don't show up immediately but dominate the outcome over time. This habit alone separated careful thinkers from reckless ones. Another key idea for him was inversion. Instead of asking, "How do I succeed?" he asked, "How could this fail?" That shift changes everything. Success is abstract. Failure is concrete. You can list ways something breaks. You can design around them. Mental models become much more actionable when you frame them around risk. What could go wrong? What assumptions am I relying on? Which of those assumptions are fragile? These questions turn vague ideas into practical filters. They don't tell you what to do, they tell you what not to do, and that's often enough. Munger also resisted the urge to constantly optimize. Optimization feels productive, it feels smart, but optimizing the wrong thing can quietly destroy you. A model that tells you when not to optimize is extremely valuable. Sometimes the best decision is to leave something alone, to accept a good enough outcome instead of chasing a perfect one. That restraint is not intuitive, it has to be trained. Munger trained it by constantly checking whether a decision improved his long-term position, not just the immediate result. Short-term wins are seductive. They produce feedback quickly. Long-term consequences arrive slowly and unevenly. Mental models help bridge that gap. They give structure to patience. They help you tolerate being early, being wrong temporarily, or doing nothing at all. Munger was very comfortable saying, "I don't know," not as a pose, as a decision. If the models didn't line up, he waited. Waiting was part of his strategy. That's another place where people misuse models. They think having a framework means always having an answer. Munger believed the opposite. A good framework often tells you to stand still, to pass, to conserve attention and capital for situations where the odds are clearly in your favor. This mindset turns mental models into filters rather than engines. They don't push you forward, they hold you back from bad moves. And that's exactly what Munger wanted. He knew that action bias, the urge to do something, ruins more decisions than inaction ever does, especially when emotions are involved. Fear, excitement, pride, none of these are good decision environments. Mental models introduce friction. They slow you down just enough to notice what you're feeling, and once you notice it, it loses some of its power. That's not psychology, that's practical self-defense. Munger didn't believe in perfect decisions. He believed in decisions that were hard to regret, decisions that would still look reasonable across many possible futures. Mental models help you think in ranges rather than predictions. They don't ask, will this work? They ask, under what conditions does this break? That's a much safer question. Over time, this approach compounds. You make fewer dramatic mistakes. You avoid irreversible losses. You stay in the game. And staying in the game is underrated, because most success is just the absence of ruin. That's why Munger never treated mental models as intellectual toys. They were part of his operating system, quiet, unflashy, relentlessly practical. They didn't make him look smart in conversations, they made him consistent over decades. And consistency in the real world beats brilliance almost every time.
At this point, it's easy to assume that mental models are mainly for investors, executives, or people making big, dramatic decisions. Charlie Munger didn't see it that way. He believed their real value shows up in ordinary moments, the ones that don't feel important at the time. Because that's where habits form, and habits quietly decide outcomes. You don't need a complicated system to use mental models. In fact, complexity usually gets in the way. Munger thought most people would benefit from using fewer ideas, not more, as long as they used them consistently. A small set of models applied again and again beats a large collection that never leaves your head. The first practical step is learning to pause. Not for a long time, just long enough to interrupt your first reaction. Most bad decisions feel urgent. They come with pressure, excitement, or fear. That emotional signal is useful. It's a cue to slow down. Munger trained himself to notice when his emotions were strong, not to suppress them, but to stop trusting them. When something felt unusually attractive or unusually frightening, he assumed his judgment was at risk. That habit alone prevents a surprising number of mistakes. Another simple practice is to flip the question. Instead of asking, "Should I do this?" ask, "What could go wrong if I do?" This doesn't require deep analysis. You're not trying to predict everything. You're just trying to spot obvious failure modes. If you can see several ways a decision could permanently damage your position, that's useful information. Munger avoided irreversible situations whenever possible. He liked options. He liked flexibility. Once something couldn't be undone, he treated it with extreme caution. That mindset applies everywhere: taking on debt, entering partnerships, making public commitments you can't walk back. Mental models push you to ask whether a decision narrows your future choices or expands them. Expansion is usually safer. Another practical habit is checking incentives, not just for others, but for yourself. People are quick to analyze external incentives and strangely blind to their own. Munger constantly asked himself why he wanted a particular outcome. Was it because it was genuinely good, or because it made him look smart, or because it aligned with his identity? That kind of honesty is uncomfortable, but it's also protective. Many bad decisions are driven by hidden incentives: status, pride, fear of missing out. Once you name them, they lose some control. Munger also believed in reducing noise. He didn't flood himself with constant information. He avoided environments that rewarded overreaction. Mental models work best when your attention isn't constantly being hijacked. Clarity requires space. Another surprisingly powerful habit is asking one quiet question before committing to anything. If this goes wrong, can I live with the outcome? Not in a dramatic sense, in a practical one. If the downside would cause lasting damage, financial, emotional, or reputational, the bar should be very high. Munger was comfortable missing opportunities. He wasn't comfortable risking ruin. This mindset changes how you view success. You stop chasing maximum upside. You start aiming for durability. durability compounds. In everyday life, this shows up as boring choices that age well, living below your means, choosing relationships that reduce stress rather than increase it, working in environments where incentives aren't constantly pushing you to cut corners. None of this feels clever. That's the point. Munger believed wisdom should feel slightly dull. Excitement is not a reliable signal of quality. Stability is. Another key practice is accepting that you will never fully eliminate mistakes. Mental models don't turn you into a machine, they just reduce the size and frequency of your errors. Munger didn't expect perfection from himself, he expected progress. Fewer emotional decisions, fewer unforced errors, fewer moments of regret. That's a realistic standard. He also didn't try to apply every model to every decision. That's a common beginner mistake. You don't need a checklist of 20 ideas, you just need a few that reliably improve your judgment. Over time, you'll notice which ones matter most to you. That process is personal. Mental models are universal, but how you use them isn't. Munger respected that. He believed thinking should adapt to your life, not the other way around. Perhaps the most important takeaway is that mental models don't replace responsibility. They don't make decisions for you. They make you more aware of what you're choosing, and awareness changes everything. Once you see the forces acting on you, incentives, emotions, social pressure, time, you're less likely to be pushed around by them. That doesn't make life predictable, it makes it manageable. Munger's approach wasn't about control, it was about alignment. Aligning your decisions with how the world actually works, not how you wish it worked. That alignment doesn't show up as dramatic breakthroughs, it shows up as a life that breaks less often. A career that compounds quietly, a set of choices you don't have to constantly defend or undo. That's not glamorous, but it's rare. And over decades, it's incredibly powerful. Munger didn't promise success, he promised something more realistic. If you think a little better, avoid obvious stupidity, and give time a chance to work, you don't need to be exceptional. You just need to be patient enough and honest enough to let sensible decisions add up. That's how ordinary people end up with extraordinary results, not through brilliance, through consistency.